Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Flint. Our prelude hymn is number 121, and I ask that you use your hymnal for the lyrics, 121, and we'll be joined by the Unitarian Universalist Choir of the Baltimore UU Church.
Welcome. My name is Harold Ford. Good morning to those of you who are here in our sanctuary, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Flint, and welcome to the people who might be watching virtually online. We're an inclusive, progressive, and LGBTQ affirming church, and we're happy to have you with us. If you'd like more information about Unitarian Universalism or about our congregation, please feel free to contact one of our ministers, and if you're new, they're sitting right down there. Or you can call the office. You can find that information online at uuflint.org. By the way, we won't have a talk back today. The issues that we will wrestle with in this service we'll have a discussion during the service, actually. If you look in your order of service, you will see that on the agenda on the order of service. and those online can participate through chat. Whatever that is, I've never used it, but you can participate through chat. Please remember that our congregation supports the free 4 Pillars mental health program of the Genesee Health System. They were here last week. Knowing about this program will help you to serve the mental health needs of our community. Just go to your e-update, your UUCF e-update to learn more. There's a concert coming. The next Joy Brewer coffee concert is coming up on September 4th, and it features some musicians that I've never heard of, but I'm told they are amazing. The Ben Turner Organ Trio. What time is that? I didn't have it.
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock is the time. Okay, on Sunday, September 4th. Starting September 28th, you can join Jerry and Lynn, our ministers, to discuss a critically acclaimed book that has an unusual cast of characters. Believe it or not, they're all Unitarian Universalists. I'm not sure I've ever read a book quite like that unless it was a history book. And there's plenty of humor in the book. Search is the name of the book, and plenty of opportunities to laugh as we learn about ourselves. The book is a work of fiction, but it's the kind that tells the truth. And now it's time for our chalice lighting, and Reverend Jerry is coming forward to do the honor. And we are lighting this flame this morning for our second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And don't we need some more of that? And if you will join me now, hopefully the covenant, yes, there it is, appearing on our monitor, recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service. We gather as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice. Once again, good morning on an absolutely beautiful late summer day.
The book, Defund Fear, describes how our government misspends our tax dollars trying to keep us safe. Our politicians say they will keep us safe by spending more money on more police, more prisons, more punishment, but they are failing at every level. Our service today includes readings from Zach Norris's book, Defund Fear, and also a video of the author and a panel of Unitarian Universalists discussing how we can build a world that is truly safe and free of fear.
Unfortunately, threats, both real and imagined, can also be used to manipulate us. It turns out that invoking safety, which inevitably means invoking threats to our safety, is an effective way to trigger automatic, irrational anxiety responses. The mere whiff of danger whips people up into a state of panic and sends us into an automatic fight or flight response because our brains are finely tuned threat detection devices. As humans evolved, those who recognized and avoided mortally dangerous things were the ones who survived to pass on their genes. We are literally wired to pay attention to any hint of danger. And those threat detection and analysis processes in our brain happen most unconsciously and automatically without the input of our rational brains. This makes us super susceptible to inflammatory rhetoric that magnifies uncertainties, risks, and threats. Politicians, journalists, advocacy groups, and marketers continue to blow dangers out of proportion for votes, ratings, donations, and profits, writes Barry Glassner, the sociologist whose 1999 bestseller, The Culture of Fear, has been reprinted and updated for the Donald Trump era. When people in power trigger anxieties and then promise a plan for safety, many are likely to embrace that plan, no matter the consequences.
Believe me, I understand the desire to keep your home and family safe. I want my family to be safe as much as you do, but safe from whom and from what? Who are the most dangerous threats to your family? Are they people in the faraway lands, in the inner cities, or people right next door? Are they people you know from within your country, your community, or even within your family? And what really constitutes the worst threat to your family? Is it really crime? Or is it facing eviction because you can't make rent? Is it frequent hospital visits because you live near an oil refinery and your child has asthma? Or because the water you drink is no longer safe? These daily routines are sometimes described as cultural, political, and socioeconomic dynamics. But they are as real as your heartbeat. Decades of funneling money toward a punishment dragnet instead of investing in real social safety nets means that one lost job, one healthcare crisis, one traffic stop can be the end of a secure life. Now, this is true whether you live in Oakland, New Orleans, Flint, or anywhere in between. Powerful entities conceal the most pervasive and persistent harms instead scapegoating and dehumanizing entire communities, calling them thieves and thugs, welfare queens and wastrels. When we allow these architects of anxiety to distract us from the real threats, we decrease our societal capacity to hold them and their politics, their policies, their institutions accountable for the things that actually threaten and harm us.
Welcome everyone to a conversation with Zach Norris, author of Defund Fear, Safety Without Policing, Prisons and Punishment. It's a book that was published by Beacon Press in 2021, last year. And today we will dig into how this book, the selected common read for Unitarian Universalism, resonates with our faith. It's an honor to act as a moderator today. My name is Roger Santo Domingo, pronounced he, him, his. I'm the executive editor of UUU World. And we are a gathering of Unitarian Universalists, religious professionals, to converse with Zach about his book's meaning and its connections to our movement and theology. We know that we act in faith when our actions come from our most deeply held beliefs about life's biggest questions. So today we invited 4 Unitarian Universalists: Ranwa Hamame, Jason Leitman, Kerry McDonald, Rayla Matson, to respond to Zach Norris' book through the lens of their faith, from the perspectives they hold as individuals, as members of diverse communities and professionals serving our Unitarian Universalist movement.
Thank you, Roger. I really appreciate that. You know, it's funny, the book was published in 2020, but I started writing it, 2014, the inklings of the idea 2015. And at that time, there was a lot of interest in bipartisan criminal justice reform, right? But there wasn't a lot of direction in terms of what would actually replace this system of mass incarceration. And so that was one of the first reasons I decided to start writing this book. We had published a report called Who Pays the True Cost of Incarceration on Families, which really detailed the interests and aims of formerly incarcerated people, currently incarcerated people and their families, and what they wanted to see in order to build a safer community. But also with this book, I was grappling with my own kind of internal contradictions, because there was advocate Zach and there was dad Zach. And advocate Zach, grew up in East Oakland. I knew that I was privileged in some ways to be able to go to Harvard, saw just how differently young people were treated for doing the same things that my friends and family were doing in East Oakland. But at Harvard, my classmates were given time off to reflect. They were given drug treatment. It was always clear that they were more than their worst mistake. And I started to learn about the deep disparities in our criminal court system, that not just across races, but even among races, the lighter your skin is, the lighter your sentence is likely to be in a courtroom, the less time you are likely to spend in a prison cell. And at every step of the criminal court system, those disparities show up. So advocate Zach knew those things and was passionate about fighting them. And then along comes dad Zach, and dad Zach really shows up the first time I held my oldest daughter in my arms, and she was just about this big. She fit just neatly across my chest, and her little rolls of skin, bundled up at the elbows and at the knees. And I thought, is she finished? Is she supposed to be out yet? Right? And I just had this overwhelming desire to protect her. And I'm standing here in my home. We had our home broken into a couple of different times. In the first year we had it. And the second time they actually broke in through my daughter's bedrooms, her as well as her younger sister. And they were just toddlers at the time. And I remember picking up these giant shards of glass off the bed and thinking, how do I protect my children? Because I know that they are young. I know that they are Black and brown. And I know that they identify as female, that they are little girls. And these are things that in the sort of relationship to risk, that puts them at very high risk in our society. And a lot of what gets discussed publicly is the sort of criminal bad guy, the stranger danger. But what we know to be true is that it is more often than not people who are very close to us who actually cause harm, right? And so part of what I was grappling with in terms of reconciling advocate Zach and dad Zach is, how do we get to safety? How do we create safety and fairness in our justice system? And it's funny because I was listening to Angela Davis this morning talk about her new book and the book of others called Abolition Feminism Now. And they were lifting up the way in which our criminal court system fails to protect people who have been survivors of violence in the home. And that, to me, is something that I take with me as both advocate Zach and dad Zach, that this current system is failing the people who have been marginalized in our society. And the way in which we define crime really hides harms that are all around us. Because one of the paradox, and I'll close with this, that I was wrestling with is, why is it that at the time I was writing the book, our crime rates were actually at historic lows, but our anxieties, even prior to COVID, were at historic highs, right? And I describe it as the fact that these architects of anxiety want to peddle the idea of bad guys and permanently bad people as causing the ills. People like, our former president, Donald Trump, will say, worry about, fear your neighbor at the border, fear your neighbor around the block, fear your neighbor in distant lands, even as they are allowing ongoing harms to continue to occur, whether it be climate change, whether it be the erosion of our democratic rights, whether it be growing inequality. And so what I tried to grapple with in this book is, how do we address those larger harms that are associated with capitalism and racism and patriarchy and some of the things that we don't as often name publicly? And that impacts all of us in terms of our specific identities. And I should name that as a light-skinned African-American cisgendered man, I exist on a spectrum of privileges and in ways that have allowed me to move ahead in life, but also have, impacted me. So I went to Harvard, and yet I also, when I was driving through Walnut Creek, got pulled over and subjected to police violence. And these are the kinds of things that I think we need to be more out front and name and talk about if we are going to really think about how do we get to safety for all of us. So that really is the whole reason for being in terms of this book.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you. So you actually set the stage. So let's start our conversation looking at what's safety. What is safety? And for that purpose, I would like you to ask each of you to answer a question that Zach posed in the book. So when is a time you felt safe? So what conditions were present?
I will give that question an attempt at an answer. So, I'll start off with saying I am a survivor of trauma. I have what is called complex PTSD. So this question about when is a time that I have felt safe comes with that layer of, well, what is really safety for me? When have I actually felt safe? And when has it been my nervous system is going haywire in a moment? And so I really had to sit and think with this about what does safety feel for me? And for me, there is a moment where I just felt unbridled joy and love and just aliveness. And it feels cliche, but it was my wedding reception in 2018. We had a very small wedding at Cat Town in Oakland for the Oakland folks. And then our reception was back at home in our apartment in Concord. We just had a few, maybe a dozen, up to 24 folks there, and it was our chosen family. I am I'm of Middle Eastern descent, Egyptian and Lebanese, queer, non-binary. My spouse is non-binary, queer, white. We have chosen family that we feel safe with. And so having them around us and celebrating all of who we are in our relationship was a big deal. The apartment complex that we were in, I held some privilege there because, I am of Middle Eastern descent. I'm a first generation United States citizen, child of immigrants, but child of very privileged immigrants, the right kind of immigrants that came in the 70s for their doctorates. So holding the complexities of those identities as well. And, I had in that moment, in that apartment complex, we had income. Both of us had stable jobs. We had a roof over our heads. We both had access to healthcare. I trusted the community around me. There were a lot of families, so I knew that folks were looking out for each other. And the folks who hadn't harmed me weren't there. So in that moment, that's where I really felt safe. And it was a lovely, wonderful day.
Revlynn and I will continue to read excerpts from Zach Norris's book, Defund Fear. I'll continue. The rails upon which the train wreck of Trump's administration is riding were laid by bipartisan predecessors going back decades. In the 1960s, as crime rates were on the rise, President Lyndon Johnson articulated one possible way to achieve public safety: to wage a war on poverty that focused on increasing investment in communities still ravaged by decades of disinvestment and Jim Crow segregation. But interest in that strategy was short-lived. Richard Nixon campaigned and won election with a focus on law and order. In so doing, he helped launch what would become the largest prison building boom in human history. Year after year, politicians of all stripes, especially at the state and local levels, fought to demonstrate who could come up with the toughest, tough on crime attitudes, the longest sentences, and decades later, despite the failure of this approach, the law and order politics of Bill Clinton and the super predator rants of Hillary Clinton kept hammering the same notes. Elsewhere, other similarly situated Western democracies chose to make deep investments in social welfare. And today they have much lower crime rates and lesser levels of inequality. They invested in a social safety net, while we invested in a punishment dragnet. They invested in care while we invested in fear. If lawmakers in the U.S. had taken the path of investment to address issues most salient in poor communities, rather than dehumanization, deprivation, and punishment, it would have benefited everyone.
A neoconservative Princeton professor described a new breed of juvenile delinquent. Super predators were remorseless and fatherless. Politicians and policymakers believed him. Youth in the justice system were now treated as predatory. By the end of the 90s, all but 3 states passed laws that mandated that youth would be tried in adult court for certain crimes. Sentences were expanded in several thousands of instances, resulting in life without parole. Many thousands of children were caged and subjected to solitary confinement. Many are in cells to this day. According to 2015 data from the Department of Justice, 70,000 young people are held daily in state, county, private, and federal juvenile residential facilities across the United States. The use of isolation, including solitary confinement, is widespread. Solitary exacerbates underlying mental illness, and with kids can have a deeper effect on mental and physical health. It's not surprising that kids would attempt suicide in solitary, commented Maria McFarland, Deputy U.S. Program Director of Human Rights Watch. In a 2014 report on the prosecution of children as adults in Florida. In fact, the DOJ has found that more than 60% of children at juvenile facilities who committed suicide had a history of being held in solitary. Approximately half of the suicide victims were in solitary at the time of their death. Others commit suicide after release, as in the case of Khalif Browder, the 16-year-old boy who spent 2 years of isolation on Rikers Island after being accused of stealing a backpack, and who had unsuccessfully attempted suicide while incarcerated. And 2 years after release, living with his mother, Khalif hanged himself successfully.
I really think about how often we talk about safety as a binary of you're either safe or you're not. And I think it's just so much about degrees and about risk. And, you know, during the pandemic, we're all making safety decisions every day that affect ourselves and our family. So when I think about experiences that feel the most safe, I think about, my family, maybe at the holidays, you know, there's lots of food, there's a warm house, everyone who loves you the most is there. You know, there's kind of everything you need in that one room. Because when safety is a binary, and it really does amplify that sense of fear, because you have to fear not being totally safe, as if, you know, that's not a possibility for many of us. I think it's often an expression of privilege for that to feel like it's on the table. I grew up in the Midwest, in the inner city. As I said, I'm a multiracial person, also very light-skinned, and so sometimes you are read, and sometimes I am read in very different ways depending on the situation. I grew up, you know, my family didn't have a lot of money. We also moved around, and so just that sense of like day to day, you know, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm great. It's just not. That's not what I grew up with. It isn't a familiar feeling to me. And the other thing I would say about safety is just how much the point about being a parent has resonated with me, and how much you are bombarded as a parent with messages about keeping your kids safe and warning labels on everything that are this big about how dangerous something is, when, you know, in reality, the effect size might be quite small. And again, you know, it's degrees of risk that you're managing all the time, but it's really, I really appreciate the point about how being a parent makes you think differently about safety.
Well, this book challenges, you know, the assumptions that punishment and prisons protect public safety. What fears reinforce this assumption? You know, how does punishment or the fear of punishment keep us safe? You know, so that's from question I asked you to jump in. So, what is safe? Who is safe here?
Well, I just appreciated like all of the wisdom that folks brought up in terms of their responses, and the complexity in terms of this question of safety. And I think that one of the reasons why this question is so loaded is because of the way in which, as has been named, like safety has been used as a weapon, right? It has been used in ways that forward and advance white supremacy and patriarchy. And it is the way in which we design our criminal court system really turns on its head our felt notions of safety. So a lot of what folks lifted up, as I heard it, was when I felt safe, I was in relationship with others who allowed me to be my full self, right? Who supported all of who I am. And if you think about what happens in terms of the criminal court system, rather than strengthening relationships, rather than supporting people in finding those communities so that they can feel their full selves, and so that, you know, a lot of what I've been taught and heard so often is hurt people, right? So we want to get people in situations where they can find a beloved community, be that in a faith community or a chosen family or wherever they find that circle. And instead, when someone causes harm, we isolate them further and further the deeper they go into the justice system, right? And that is the opposite of what we need to be doing in order to produce greater safety. And for me, part of what I tried to lift up in the book, and which comes from the wisdom of people we talked with and who are members of the Ella Baker Center and their allies was, what does safety look like to us? It looks like when people are cared for. It looks like when people are in good relationship. It looks like when they have the resources that they may have been historically deprived of because of the color of their skin or other factors, where they are participating in the decisions in terms of how resources and other things are distributed. And yes, where people are held accountable. And I think we get it twisted in that we believe that holding someone accountable means punishing them and pushing them away, when I believe that you can't truly hold someone accountable if you aren't also holding them in community. Because to be held accountable really means to be answerable to the harm that you have caused. And in order to be answerable to someone, you actually have to be in relationship. Again, coming back to relationship with that person you've harmed. So those are kind of my thoughts on, what it means to move away from this framework of fear that others and really to build a culture of care. And it really is a systematic change that we need to see in all levels of society. And I'm so privileged to be a part of this group of folks who are thinking about that, not just from a sort of pragmatic or policy level, but really from a deeper spiritual theological level, which I think is right on. I think of Michelle Alexander, who went from being a lawyer now to really engaging as a theologian. And I feel like I'm in really good company with you all.
There are 4 key elements in the framework of fear in America: deprivation, suspicion, punishment, and isolation. In the punishment feature, the core of the current safety paradigm is exacting harsh punishment upon those whom we believe have caused harm, to keep them from doing it again and to deter others from doing likewise. Jails and prisons inflict penalties for those harms that our laws and courts count as punishable crimes. As a result, nearly 7 million adult Americans are in jail or prison, or are on parole or probation, while more than 40,000 young people are wasting away in juvenile detention. We have state and federal prisons for criminally convicted adults who are generally serving more than a year for a felony. We have local jails for those serving shorter sentences and those awaiting trial. We have federal detention facilities for immigrants awaiting deportation. State hospitals house people with mental illness under civil commitment. And then we have an entire juvenile justice system devoted to the detention of children. For the last 50 years, we have been caging people at levels never seen before in human history, with the U.S. prison population growing by more than 700% between 1973 and 2017. In a system focused on punishment, we spend more of our public money on police and on militarizing them, meaning we outfit them with armored personnel carriers, riot gear, tear gas, sonic and ultrasonic weapons, assault rifles, submachine guns, flashbang grenade launchers, sniper rifles, and SWAT teams.
So we, the people, need to roll up our sleeves and hold our institutions accountable to all of us. Real safety happens when we bridge the divides and build relationships with each other, overcoming suspicion and distrust. Real safety comes from strategic, smart investments, meaning resources directed toward our stability and well-being. Real safety addresses the harms that the current system is failing to tackle and holds people accountable for those harms while still holding them in community. Real safety results from reinstating full humanity and agency for everyone who has been dehumanized and traumatized so they can participate fully in society. If we are able to transform our old systems and create a culture of caring and healing in its place, we may have an actual shot at creating real democracy for the first time.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And I think that one of the things I would add is that we can't let the system take advantage of our fear either, and claim that they're actually making us safe when they're not. I think multiple of us talked about being survivors of violence, and the reality is that the system does not keep us safe from violence. Particularly, I think about sexual violence. The system completely and utterly fails at keeping anybody safe from sexual violence. It is not doing that. And it lies about doing it all day, every day. And the media colludes with it by giving us TV shows like SVU and all of these others, where we are taught that the police are keeping women, girls, safe from sexual violence. That's one of their big stories. And yet it couldn't be less true. We couldn't be more lied to by this system about anything than this. I mean, this is just a complete distortion of its functionality. Instead, it thrives. It thrives on sexual violence, both the perpetuation of it from people outside of prison and the perpetuation of it within the prison system itself. And so one of the things for us as you use to do is use that rational reason that we believe in so deeply, where reason is so vital to who we are and rationality is so vital, that part that often we critique sometimes around some of the white supremacy that gets put in as part of it, but also that hyper-rationality can tell us that the system is lying to us, and we do not like to be lied to. There is nothing we dislike more than being misled by those in power. And so this system is lying. And so we cannot let them. And so part of that faith is turning to our reason and turning to that mystery of what we can do instead. And I love what you were saying, Carrie, about this is a long journey. And Zach's book, I think, really reflects that, about saying that we have a lot of work to do. And as people of faith, that's what we can do. We can hold on to the need for it being long-term.
And you put it in a way that is also very useful to jump to the following thing, because in this moment, I mean, even sexual violence, not to mention the use of masks to protect against a virus, is a reason for a political struggle, political divide. And Zach actually concludes that in the book that democracy is in danger. So are we allowed to express some fear for democracy here? Zach says that transforming our fear-based justice system into a culture of care affirms democracy over fascism and authoritarianism. So in this moment, you think this something is possible in this divide that we are in, the risk, of the situation that we have living today with this democracy?
Absolutely. Thank you, Roger, for that question. I think I am someone who believes that people closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. But I also want to underscore that every single person in this country is close to the problem of a police state, because the absence of a social welfare state, the absence of a culture of care leads to a gigantic police state, which is fundamental to authoritarianism and fascism. I think the more you can label any one person as undeserving of rehabilitation, undeserving of second chances, undeserving of the franchise, any of the good things that we believe all people should have, the more you can do that to any one of us. And that's what we've seen. January 6, 2021 doesn't happen if there hasn't been this massive buildup of the prison industrial complex. So if you didn't care about what was happening, which you should as a person of faith, by the way, to people who are incarcerated, you should care about our capacity to have a democracy, period. And so, I hope that that people see that connection, that there is a direct connection between the state of our criminal court system, whether or not we have a culture of care, and whether or not we have a democracy.
I'm proud of you guys. You did a fantastic conversation. I mean, this was so rich, and I want to thank you, everyone, especially, of course, Zach, for being with us. And well, this is I hope it's not the last conversation that we have. I want to remind you of, you can watch in the UUA website, uua.org/threat for more ways to respond to Defund Fear. Also, if I may, I promise soon it's going to be an interesting coverage of this in uuworld.org. And if you don't have the book, please go to In Spirit, the UUA book and gift shop, and buy it. If you buy more than 10, you can get a discount. It's in uubookstore.org, and you can look for it. So thank you. Bye.
We are now going to switch over to a time for discussion. I do want to say that those were clips of the video. The video is much longer than that. And you can go to uua.org and look up Defund Fear and listen to more of it if you'd like to hear the whole thing. And then there's other resources there as well. But we are going to start the discussion. And for those of you that are at home, live, you can go to chat and ask questions or make comments, and we will have you participate in that way. Go ahead.
A question, a big one, a general one to begin with. Is there something in our readings or in the video that particularly stays with you? Something that really stood out, perhaps echoed something that you already believed? In other words, anything at all, thoughts, questions about this very big topic?
Just raise your hand and the mic will come to you.
Yeah, Bonnie?
I just like the point about the degrees of safety that one can fear. You can't think about everything at once. In my life, I can't think of everything at once. If I'm focusing on my fear for democracy, it's a very sharp and powerful fear that I have. I don't believe that I feel fear at all when I'm living my life on a daily basis. I don't. I am very privileged in my life. I am loved by my husband. I am loved by my family. So, and my community, and that means a lot. So, but when you focus on things like that, and your fear of diseases that are affecting people that you love, that can be a heavy thing to deal with. But there are degrees, and you go through life with all of those degrees, and that's something that that stuck with me. Yeah, that was a good statement.
I think that really gets at his main point, is that are you afraid of crime or this or that, or are you really afraid of not having good health care? All these systemic things that really make life rough. And you can be afraid of all of them, but there are so many things in our system that are imperfect and lead us to be unsafe. Yeah.
The thing that struck me the most in the video, in the readings, was the suicide rate, especially of young people, and the problem of keeping people safe from themselves and others safe from them, and therefore you put a person in solitary confinement, and the whole issue of how do you protect other people from people and people from themselves when they're in a state like that. I think I have a little bit of good news for everybody here. The captain in charge of the Genesee County Jail is Captain Jason Gould. Jason is one of the board members of Motherly Intercession. That's the organization that provides services for children whose parents have been or maybe currently are incarcerated. And he gave a tour of the jail facility to board members several years ago. And he showed us the intake cells where people are put if they are non-compliant, and they're padded, and they'd be in isolation, and they give them food like a sandwich or chips, something that they can't really mess up the whole room with. And he said, and those people, it usually takes a day or maybe 2 or 3 days for them to get the drugs out of their system where you can then communicate with them on a rational level. He said he impresses on all of the people that work in the jail. These are human beings. They deserve treatment that is, kind and considerate. And especially the people that are just brought in, they are innocent until proven guilty. So I think at least in this county, we've got a pretty good jail that's being run with people who view everyone as fellow human beings.
The thing that stuck with me the most, and something I see every day in my practice, is that violence is often people you love and know, who are closest to you.
Definitely. Statistically correct.
Zach Norris, did we turn this off? Hello. Zach Norris makes that point in his book, and I'm reserving, hopefully, some time to comment for myself.
I learned somewhere the function of police was to break strikes. And when I was growing up, I picked up from my dad, and he rode the rails during the Depression. And the police were not his friend, and he didn't want the police around. My brothers were not as observant as I was. But I think keep that in mind, that the police are there to protect the established order.
Anybody else?
It's complicated. I run all over this city. And I've had Sunday school kids at Woodsides that lived in danger situations with drive-bys shooting up their house, and where dad was in prison, they so looked forward to him coming home. It did not turn out the way they had hoped. But also, just within recently, we've had a program in Genesee County where they've kind of have a consortium of police from the state, county, and local level with programs. The sheriff, and there again, I'm one of those people that was skeptical. People rave about our sheriff, and I thought, I'm from a child of the 70s. I thought, question authority, accept your mother. But he was at a Democratic fundraiser, and he spoke about the need of understanding how to prevent crime and to understanding the community. He talked about calling a connection in the NBA and getting 100 basketballs and 100 nets to put up throughout the city. He talked about programs, and he also joined with the Black Lives Matter. Because you talk about policing with strikes, it was also to control slaves very back in those days also. And I was at the city council meeting, happened to be to speak for Pride when they were working on commemorating that. And the mother was there whose son was shot and killed downtown Memorial Day weekend. And she talked about the lack of police. And it's true, and prior to that, because I run around downtown at night all the time, and there was not. You had security guys that you're thinking they might need my protection, when you looked at them. So they've had a new program, and when I first saw the new system down there, I think it was during Jazz Walk, and which was a great event, black, white, it was packed, and it really felt like a vibrant city. And there was police, but you kind of looked at it like, They almost had that look like they were looking for a fight. And I talked to my daughter that weekend, and she said, what's this I hear about police? And there was an issue with stop and frisk type situations. But I think somehow somebody did get the message, because again, there was police down there for Back to the Bricks, a huge, huge amount. But they also didn't look like they were looking to throw you up against the wall. They were your smiley police. And I think that message got through. I mean, it's complicated. I was campaigning yesterday, and I talked to a woman who talked about what a difference she needed to get the police there for when her husband visited, and what a difference that made in how he presented and her safety. Policing, you see them when you don't want to see them, and they're not there when you do need them. It's complicated to get it right. But we've got to keep trying, because safety is important, community is important, and there's so much at stake here. And we left Luigi's the other night, the sound of gunfire, and you decide to go home, not in that direction. But then also, my girlfriend Kim was out at the county park in Davison, where the Eagle's Nest is. And they had an assault rifle situation out there, and it was bullet zinged by them and into the water. So it's not just citywide, but I worry about a neighbor who has both guns and mental illness in the house, and they're stewing in this Trumpian dystopia, so it's interesting.
Tina has a comment, and then we're going to have to close pretty soon, but I wanted to say, if you haven't read the book, and you're really interested, and it's not a long book, he does, in certain chapters, he has a list of what do you do. Oh, I'm sorry. In the book, if you haven't read the book, it's short. But in the book there are some chapters where he does offer suggestions of solutions. So it's not just, things are terrible. He also offers solutions.
One thing I'm afraid of is the infiltration of the police unions and the police departments by authoritarian fascist elements. Is quite active. There's a woman who was in my water workout. Her daughter's a deputy, I think in Oakland County. And she said they're going to have a locker room where all sexes can be together, blah, 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 going on. And I said, where did you hear that? She said, my daughter works here. She knows. And then next time I saw her, they forgot, they're not going to do that. The law went into effect, a week before, and this is going to happen. Where do they hear that? Mm-hmm. It's a very active thing going into police unions.
That's it.
I think you had, we have a few more minutes here.
You had a comment.
Yeah, you had a few insights too, Harold.
Well, I look around the congregation, and the demographics are obvious, aren't they? Most of us are comfortable, middle-class white folk, and a lot of us elderly, and we live in places where we might need the police less frequently than if you lived in other areas. Look, I think we're an over-policed society. I think we've ceded too much power to them. I think we've over-incarcerated our country. The resources, I brought in my FB Red Squad file that I accessed. I only have 6 pages of it. There's about 12 more that I haven't gotten, and I could give you other examples of how I think we're over-policed. However, I worked in Beecher for 43 years, and the face of a longtime Beecher employee that I worked with has been on the news quite a bit lately. It's an individual, God, I'd love to say his name, but I won't do it. He went from school system to school system, including Beecher, and was a serial sexual assaulter. We knew that. And what did he do? He worked out an agreement. First of all, one youngster that came forward that didn't want to go public, did not want to press charges. That's usually what happened. They're embarrassed by the situation. Didn't press charges. He hired a high-priced attorney to work out an agreement so that nothing could be revealed publicly. And then what did that individual do? He did the same thing he did before he arrived at Beecher and after he left Beecher, after we let him go. And that was, he went on to another school district and assaulted more children. Now, I read this book, and I agree in restorative justice. I practiced it as an administrator out at Beecher. But what do you do with an adult like that goes from district to district? Shower him with restorative justice? I don't think so. I think I know where that individual needs to be. Certainly not in the school system. And what do you say to the parents of the Sandy Hook victims about restorative justice? Like you said, Terry, this is a complicated issue. And there are many ways to slice and dice this. I agree that we are over-policed. We spend too much of our money policing one another. But we have folks in this society that I don't think qualify for restorative justice. They require some other kind of justice. I'll stop there. I could have said more.
Yes. Do you have the mic? Yeah, he has the mic.
Is it good? Okay. Just a few comments. Amy Lobert, right? Amy Lubert said that in her years that she spent, pull this up, in the juvenile system for 14 years, she rarely had behavior problems with the kids because she always approached them with the UU principle that everyone deserves compassion and dignity. Others did not and had power struggles regularly. And then Charles Thomas asked a question to Lynn. Could you share a few examples of the solutions the author offers in the book?
Yeah. Some of the things that he says, for instance, are programs like Motherly Intercession. When I was reading the book, I said to Jerry, I said, we're doing this, because Motherly Intercession was one of the kinds of programs that he suggested. And actually, so that I don't forget, I'm gonna just pull out, I took notes while I was reading the book, but he says that part of it is relationships. He talks a lot about relationships of people in communities. And he's in Oakland, the author is, and so he has created a center, like it's a community center, but it has all of these different resources. He also says participation, making sure that people are involved in some sort of activity so that they're not getting themselves in trouble. So a lot of this is active distraction. Maybe I'll use distraction. He didn't use that word. I can't remember what he used. The other thing I wanted to say is he said accountability a lot, if you remember reading. I mean, he had accountability in every chapter. And so it's not that you wouldn't punish someone or some people, but there are always ways to be accountable. And he talked a lot about the accountability of the person who committed the crime is important. But he did say the most important thing is that you have to provide a satisfactory experience for the person that was harmed.
I can, is this off? Am I on? I can give an example. I've read over half the book. I'm sorry I didn't finish it in preparation for this service, but he talks a lot about restorative justice, and he said that public school systems are ahead of the criminal justice community in utilizing restorative justice. I agree with that. I was using restorative justice when I was an administrator in my last 3 years at Beecher High School. I'll give you but one example. So one of our youngsters, a rambunctious young man who as a freshman at our 9th grade academy was a starting center on the Beecher High School basketball team. And so to get a fly, he kicked the window and knocked it out completely to get a fly. And in the days of old, that 6'6" youngster might have been suspended because he damaged school property, right? That's probably what would have happened to me when I went to high school way back in the day. But I was schooled in PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention System, restorative justice. I didn't want to kick the kid out. That's like sending him to jail in the adult society. So this is what I worked out. I had the parents in. Actually, he was being raised by his grandparents. And I explained what he had done, that he had damaged school property, and that I worked out a deal with the custodial crew, that he would work with the custodial crew after school at the hourly rate that was appropriate and the number of hours that it would take to pay for that window that he kicked out, that the maintenance crew had to replace. Stayed in school, went to his classes, but that would be an example of restorative justice. Instead of kicking him out, he helped pay for that window that he kicked out.
You're not on.
A lot of restorative justice goes under the other term of alternative sentencing, but it would be outrageously different sentencing, finding ways that instead of separating individuals from the community, locking them up, which we know for a fact doesn't work. This author provides a lot of good evidence for what he's saying in terms of statistics that show that restorative justice in most instances, many instances, works very well. And it's a lot about what we might call alternative sentencing that keeps the person in the community, if it's safe. And there's just so many creative things that can be done in terms of fostering the person's rehabilitation.
I just want to say something really quick that really stuck with me. He said, punishment is done to someone. Accountability is something you do with someone. And I thought that really said something. Yeah.
A last comment, possibly by Amy, that I think fits this well, says, prisons and other facilities, there needs to be therapeutic interventions within the facilities. It is not necessarily an either-or situation.
Thank you. And just lastly, you know, we're talking a lot about punishment and after a crime has been committed, et cetera. But a lot of what he's talking about, and he did mention that in the interview, is to not have crime happen in the first place, and how you do that is to have a culture of caring so that everyone feels safe in the first place. They're not acting out of fear. And he says one of the ways you do that is by addressing the actions and the policies, the behaviors that are present in the system that are most harmful to the people who are, you know, being incarcerated the most. So that's, yeah.
Can I just throw something in quick? The friend friend of mine, Shelley Spivak, they run a program, the Arts Unlocked, in the Genesee Valley Detention Center with the kids. And again, I've had the pleasure of going with a group of those young women to the F. Flynn Institute of Arts and watching this transformation of these girls at this quilt exhibit, and it just in the beauty and peace of that place. But they offer so many programs, and there's going to be a fundraiser coming up, so I will probably give information to people there. Ran into Shelley the other day downtown, and they do good things.
Thanks.
Okay. Hello, is my mic on, Thorpe? There we go. Okay, so I want to thank Lynn and Jerry for demonstrating once again why I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and that is we have thought-provoking services. This was certainly thought-provoking today, and we have a free and open pulpit. Where else can a commoner like me run off at the mouth like I did this morning? So we've come to a time for generosity. And we think of that in terms of 3 T's: time, talent, and treasure. And so I will remind you of these words from St. Francis of Assisi: for it is in the giving that we receive. It will come back to us in unexpected ways. You can contact the ministers if you want to give of your gifts of time, talent, or treasure. You can also contribute by leaving a donation in the basket at the table and back, or send it to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Flint, Congregation of Flint. I like to be a role model. I'm like not to think of myself as a showboat. My pledge is all paid up. But this morning, during the pandemic, a little extra income, I think, was available to many of us. We didn't travel. We didn't do a lot of things. We didn't eat out as much, and so we might be able to make an extra contribution. I'm going to make a little extra contribution this morning. I would encourage anybody who can to do that in all the ways possible. And thank you.
Our closing words are those of author and poet Alice Walker. Though we have all encountered our share of grief and troubles, we can still hold the line of beauty, form, and beat. No small accomplishment in a world as challenging as this one. Hard times require furious dancing. Each of us is the proof. And let us extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thanks everyone.
Jerry's short and cute.
I believe we have coffee. Coffee is great too.
Yeah, I know.